Welcome on in to the Utah Blockcast. I'm Steve Bartle, Utah insider for KSL Sports. It's good to be back with you on a Monday. It's Monday of week 0. We're going to have college football this weekend. Pretty exciting stuff. We get closer and closer to week 1. We are now, one Saturday? 1 Saturday away? 2 Saturdays away? How are we counting it? I don't know. But we've got college football this weekend, Big 12 football this weekend with Kansas State and Iowa State. So pretty excited about that. And man, we just get closer and closer to the beginning of the season. So it's exciting. And on today's episode, over the weekend, Utah held Fan Fest. It was really good to be up there at Rice-Eccles Stadium, seeing the massive turnout from Utah fans. That was really cool to see. And I want to take a moment to say thanks to everybody, to shout out everybody that came up, introduced themselves to me, and said they appreciated the work. And so I appreciate you guys, appreciate everybody that tunes in, appreciate all the Utah fans that showed up there. That was really fun to be up there, have some interactions with fans, hear from fans. There's a lot of cautious optimism. I think excitement is returning. Obviously, we understand the last 2 years have been less than ideal. It's been a lot of pain, a lot of frustration, but I do think the optimism and excitement is returning for Utah fans. So, and again, based on what we saw up there at Fan Fest, it was a lot of excitement, and it was really good to see a lot of the interactions between fans and student athletes. And I think that's important for Utah moving forward in this new era of college athletics, is to continue to focus on those opportunities to establish relationships and connections with these players. So Fan Fest was great. Saw a lot of conversations with student athletes and fans. And, I think Alex Jensen, every time I saw him, he was talking to someone else, talking to someone new. And I think there's a lot of intrigue around this Runnin Utes basketball program. But prior to Fan Fest, Utah Athletic Director Mark Harlan and one of his executive directors, Jason Greco, held a town hall for Utah fans to attend, and there was a pretty good turnout for that as well. And Harlan and Greco talked for about an hour and took questions for about 30 minutes, and I thought it was pretty insightful. We got some pretty candid responses to some questions, and a couple of which were regarding the transfer portal and some of the transfer portal activity we've seen over the last couple cycles. And I think poaching is a term that many like to use. And so it was interesting to get some responses from that. And that's actually where I want to start today, is that town hall with Harlan and Greco. But on today's episode, also going to run through my predictions for Utah's depth chart. I believe we're going to see a depth chart next week for game week, and I wanted to give my best predictions for what this is going to look like based on what we've learned over the course of fall camp. And so I'm going to take my crack at it and see. We'll see how close I get next week when Utah is expected to release their first depth chart of the 2025 season. So wanted to run through that, and then also, I actually had a conversation last week with Andrew Crowley, a.k.a. the Runnin Hoops Pod, and meant to post it as a bonus episode this past weekend, but just had too much fun over the weekend. And, apologies, Andrew. Don't hate me. I'll have you on again soon, and that. But I'm going to post it. I'm going to add it here to this episode, so you'll get that as well. It's about a 30-minute conversation, and we dive into Utah's non-conference schedule and just some random updates as well on the basketball program. But like I said, wanted to dive into this town hall and what we learned from Harlan and Greco about Utah moving forward into this new era, revenue-sharing era of college athletics. And I think what became quite clear to me is there's still a lot of uncertainty about the future. There's still even with the House versus NCAA settlement, which went into effect July 1, with the new rules and some of the adaptations that we're seeing to rules and all that sort of stuff, there's still a lot of chaos and a lot of uncertainty about how things are going to be moving forward. And with Harlan talking about Utah specifically, he made a point. So before we talk about Utah specifically, he opened up by clarifying what is actually changed, what is going on with this revenue sharing era. And I think we all kind of understand that Utah is going to be, paying the full revenue distribution amount of $20.5 million to current student athletes. That amount is actually going to increase by 4% each and every year for the next 10 years. That's how long this settlement has been termed for. And so that is something to keep in mind, is that Utah now essentially has a $20.5 million payroll for their student athletes that they have to figure out how to budget for. Another thing that Harlan revealed is they also have to pay punitive damages for the previous 10 years for student athletes of the past 10 years, which is about $2.2 billion, 2.9 maybe. Essentially, it's $850,000 for Utah specifically that they have to pay to students of the past for the next 10 years. So that is essentially what Utah's on the hook for. They've got the revenue sharing amount, which they can essentially choose how much of that full amount they want to pay. And Utah has made it clear since this became a thing that they are going to pay the full amount. Harlan even shared that there are a couple programs in the Big 12 that aren't going to be at the full amount, which I thought was interesting. But Utah is. They've got the means to do it. They've had the support to do it, and I think that is really important for Utah moving forward, because revenue sharing it's everything now. You've got to have that money to utilize for student athletes, and so they're committed to the full amount. And Harlan, made it a point to make clear their goals have not changed. Their goals remain graduating student athletes and competing for conference championships. And he made the point that in order to do that, we have to be at the full amount of that revenue sharing figure to stay competitive at the top of the Big 12 and in college football and college sports, across the board. So that's going to be their goal. So that $20.5 million, that is an amount that is not provided to them from the NCAA or from TV contracts. That is essentially $20.5 million that they have to figure out how to come up with. It's basically going to come from their revenue, which incorporates a number of different things, but that is where that money is going to be to come from. And so, with that $20.5 million, programs have to determine how to divvy that up amongst their sports. And essentially across the country, what most programs are figuring, what they're sort of modeling their splits between, is you're going to see a 75% split and distribution of that $20.5 million to football. So 75% of that is about $15 million. You're going to see a lot of football programs around that number. 15% of that is going to go to men's basketball, 5% to women's basketball, and then 5% to all other sports. And so Utah, along with all other college programs, are going to be around those marks with those splits and how that money is going to be divvied up. And one question that I thought was really interesting was, obviously that's based on historical data of the past. And what we're seeing right now is the growth of women's sports and the amount of money being invested in women's sports. And so what Harlan was he provided kind of a candid response that there is greater attention being paid to women's sports. The NCAA is going to provide the same sort of rewards for women's basketball in the NCAA tournament, essentially. But he also shared that, there is a lot of talk from the TV networks about, increased viewership and support of women's sports, but the money dollars behind them still isn't there. It's still not meeting or matching sort of the conversation around the attention that women's sports is gaining. But I thought it was really interesting that, there are people that are mindful of that, women's sports is on the forefront of people's minds now. And I thought that was really interesting. So that'll be something to keep in mind as we move forward with this, is how these splits will be managed and divvied up. And Utah women's basketball specifically, they've had a lot of success in recent years, and they want to continue with that momentum moving forward. And so having that revenue available to them, having that money available is going to be vital to bringing in the type of talent that they need to continue to compete the way that they have the last few years. So that was really interesting. And, with all of this, the biggest concern, biggest frustration for fans, not just of Utah, but I think college sports fans, across the board, is transfer portal activity and the term poaching, right? And we understand the loopholes. We know what they are, right? All of these student athletes have agents, have people representing them that have conversations that don't connect them to various schools. But look, we all understand what's going on. And what I thought was interesting when asked about revenue sharing and the settlement and some of the rules and how that's going to curtail some of that activity, one thing that Harlan brought up was the fact that they can now sign athletes to multi-year contracts to serve as a deterrent to poaching. He also shared that they don't have a lot of student athletes signed to multi-year contracts, but they do have a few. And, with these contracts, he also added that, terms of their agreements will have the ability to also kind of deter, student athletes, hopefully, from entering the portal unnecessarily. Terms in terms of terms in the sense of coach, comparable to coaches leaving for another institution, that there are buyouts and that sort of stuff. We'll start to see some of those terms entering into these contracts with student athletes, in my opinion. And so that is something that Harlan pointed to as a reason or something that is going to help improve the activity, transfer portal activity. And another thing that he continued to point to is the College Sports Commission, and this is a new entity that is outside of the NCAA that is going to have people within it that come from compliance and come from other various walks of life, but they're going to be tasked with essentially serving as a clearinghouse for all things revenue sharing, third-party NIL, and roster spots. So this is a new clearinghouse. They're going to work. They are essentially behind the new NIL Go, which is a platform that essentially provides the portal to approve or not approve certain NIL deals. So essentially, this is going to be the the new clearinghouse for college sports, is an outside entity that will be tasked with providing clarity for college programs. That is something that colleges are looking to, which I think is going to be interesting. The College Sports Commission, the CSC, there remains a lot to be seen in terms of how much authority they're actually going to have, what sort of rules they can actually enforce, what sort of punishment they can hand down. I remain skeptical, but man, that was really hard to say. I remain skeptical of, the College Sports Commission and what sort of impact it's actually going to have. But Harlan seemed optimistic that, it's going to have a positive impact on the behaviors of college athletics. And he made it clear that, this first year there's going to be a lot of learning. There's going to be a lot of learning through mistakes, through successes, because this is the first year of revenue sharing. And, he made it a point that It's going to be on the college programs to hold one another accountable, which is always kind of dicey if that's sort of your operating mode. I think that's pretty hopeful, and so we'll see. We'll see what sort of impact that has, and then obviously the big thing that he mentioned is that government assistance in providing sort of the means with federal regulation and that sort of stuff is kind of the big focus right now. He mentioned that there is a bill close to passing that would provide additional help with regards to providing guardrails for NIL contracts and transfer portal activity, apparently. So we'll see, but relying on Congress right now is going to be that's kind of where we're at with all of this. So we'll see. There's a lot to learn, a lot to experience. We're in a chaotic time right now, and I think trying to get it organized is just going to be a long process. So that's what we need to prepare for. But I think it's important, and this is a point that Harlan made time and time again, is that the student athletes are not at fault here, that they are still student athletes of our favorite institution, and we need to continue to support them as best we can. And that was something that he mentioned a handful of times throughout the town hall. So with that in mind, let's transition to football. So we're going from revenue sharing to football. We're going to just dive right into it. And like I said, I'm going to make my predictions on Utah's depth chart, what it's going to look like, which I expect we'll see next week, game week, because we know Whittingham isn't going to tip his hand any sooner than he has to. And we know how important these depth charts are. so let's get to it here with my prediction on Utah's depth chart. So we'll start offensively. Quarterback Devin Dampier, QB1, unquestionably the guy for Utah. As long as Utah keeps him healthy this season, Utah is going to be in contention, in my opinion. I think they're going to have a pretty competitive year as long as they keep Devin upright and healthy. So that's going to be key. Behind him, the backup quarterback spot has been one of the more talked about battles in camp. And to start, it sounded like Isaac was off to a really good start in camp. Coach Whittingham mentioned when we spoke with him that second week that Wilson was having a really productive camp, that he looked improved. But last week, and I think even the week before, he mentioned that the competition is still ongoing, which is maybe a little concerning. You would hope that Isaac would have had that spot sewn up as we've gotten to this point of camp, right? The conclusion of it. But I'm still going to edge on the side of experience and put Wilson as the backup with Bird coming in as QB3. Transitioning to running back, we know what this group is going to look like at the top. It's going to be Wayshawn Parker and Nakari Rogers as a 1-2 combo. Whittingham shared that they're pretty interchangeable, that it's not for certain that Wayshawn is going to be top dog. I would be surprised if he's not. So I have Wayshawn RB1, Nakari RB2. This third spot is going to be interesting because they have 4 other running backs in competition for that spot, with Devin Green, Bryce Duke, Daniel Bray, and Racing Guillory. I'm going to list Bray as the RB3. And my reasoning here is he serves as the biggest complement to Parker and Rogers in terms of the change of pace that he provides. He has a little bit more athleticism, speed, juice, whatever you want to call it. He offers a little bit more in the passing game where you can do a little bit, some different things with him. So I'm going to put Bray as RB3, but again, it could be any of the other 3 in the mix for that spot. But Bray having the time in the program, in the offense, he got here during the winter workouts, so he's been here. He had spring ball and all that. I'm going to list him as RB3. At tight end, this is a spot that I'm really interested in seeing how Utah actually lists it. Um, you know, under Andy Ludwig, Utah had a Y tight end and they had a U tight end. They had two designated tight end spots. I don't think we'll see that. I think we're just going to have one tight end position on the depth chart. Maybe we see two, but I think it's going to be Dallin Bentley listed as the top dog at tight end with Hunter Andrews behind him. Now, maybe Hunter Andrews is listed as a fullback. Maybe he's listed as the third running back. He's a Swiss Army knife. They could list him in a number of different positions, but I'm going to list him as tight end 2. And then behind him, I went 3 deep here as well with J.J. Buchanan or Otto Tia. That's the first or on the depth chart is J.J. Buchanan, Otto Tia at tight end. At wide receiver, again, we know that Whittingham shared that they feel good about a top 7, and I shared what I felt that top 7 looked like last week with guys included here. But this is a group where I feel like there's going to be a surprise. So I have it listed. I have it laid out here. This is how I view sort of the depth chart. But I would not be surprised to see a surprise on the depth chart at wide receiver for Utah. In fact, I almost expect it just because there always seems to be a surprise with maybe who is listed where, that sort of thing. So we'll see. But here's how I see it. At X receiver, I have Tobias Merriweather listed as the top guy there, with Dadrian Zipperer actually listed behind him as the backup. At the Y position, I have Larry Simmons and Justin Stevenson listed there as the 1-2. And then at the Z spot, which is your slot receiver essentially, I have Creed Whittemore and Ryan Davis listed there as well. So that's how I see it. But again, almost fully expect to see a surprise here because that's just the way it goes at wide receiver sometimes. Offensive line, first 5, chalk across the board: Lomu, Togiai, Kump, Mokofisi, and Fano. The second unit is going to be really interesting to see how they listed because I feel they have a really good group of linemen behind the starters, but there's some uncertainty in where exactly they're going to be listed. So I have Zeroe Williams listed as the primary backup behind Lomu at left tackle. I have Soloto Moyai listed as the backup at left guard. I have Ike Garcia listed at center. Now, Garcia got a lot of work last year at along the left side, at left tackle and left guard, but I know that he's also gotten work at center. So I'm going to list him here just because it makes all the other pieces fit together quite nicely, but he could be listed anywhere across the offensive line. And then also Keith Olson at right guard, Kalolo Taaga, who was, again, the transfer from USC during the winter portal. That's how I see the second unit shaping up. So that's what I've got there. So, yeah, that's how I see the offensive side of the ball. If you have thoughts, opinions, suggestions, questions, whatever, who do you think fits where, that sort of stuff, please feel free to hit me up. Send me your predictions on the offensive side of the ball. Let's get to the defensive side. On the defensive side, this is going to be interesting. So at defensive end, we know Logan Fano is going to man one defensive end spot. Who the starter is going to be opposite of him, that has been one of the bigger talking points of fall camp. I think it's going to boil down to one of 3 guys: Cash Dillon, Lance Holtzclaw, or John Henry Daly. For whatever reason, I think Paul Fitzgerald is just a lock to be listed as the backup to Logan Fano, but he for certain has been in the mix. But I just think he's going to be listed as the backup to Fitzgerald, to Fano, for whatever reason. That's not something that I've been told. That's just how my brain views Fitzgerald for whatever reason. So I'm going to say Cash Dillon emerges as top dog at this defensive end spot. Now, maybe it's not out of fall camp. Maybe it's into the season in reality. But for my prediction, I'm going to list him as the starter opposite of Fano, with Lance Holtzclaw and John Henry Daly listed as the backup with an or between them. Based on everything that we've heard during fall camp, this has been a really heated competition. And that was the expectation coming into camp for this spot, based on what Lewis Powell shared with us in week 1. So that's how I see it. Inside, Defensive tackle, Dallas Vakalahi, DT1, Aliki Vimahi, the other starter. And then I have Jonah Leia backing up Vimahi, and I have the true freshman Carson Kafusi listed as a backup to Vakalahi. Now with this, maybe there's another surprise here. This is a group where, maybe we see Leia listed as a starter. Maybe we see Vimahi listed as a backup. Maybe we see another freshman, whether it be Semi Taulunga, Pupu Sepulona, Dylan Battle maybe listed here as well. But that's how I see the defensive tackle position. At linebacker, we've got the Mac and Rover positions. I've got Lander Barton and Lavani Demouni as the 1-2 at Mac, with Jonathan Hall and Trey Reynolds as the 1-2 at Rover. And then the defensive secondary. One name that we've heard a lot about, fall camp, spring ball, Jackson Benny. I don't have him listed here because I don't know exactly where to place him. So just be mindful of Benny here. He could play anywhere, really, for Utah. So with that in mind, I've got Nickelback as Smith Snowden and Jalen Moson. Cornerback, Scooby Davis, Jeremiah Caldwell. I think Caldwell has had, based on what we've heard, I think Caldwell has had a good camp where he's shown progress from where he ended in spring ball. And I think him being the backup to Davis is a recognition of his improvement. Now, that other cornerback spot, you've got Blake Cotton emerging in that race with Donovan Saunders. Those are going to be, I think those are going to be the top two cornerbacks, at that spot. I think Donovan Saunders very well could also serve as backup to Scooby Davis, with Caldwell serving behind him in terms of the overall hierarchy here. But that's how I see it. And then at safety, Rabbit Evans, Nate Ritchie, the 1-2 at strong safety, and maybe a surprise here at free safety. I've got Teo Johnson, obviously, as the starter, with Nathan Tillman, the true freshman, listed behind him. So that's somebody that we've heard a lot of good things about. Teo Johnson raved about him and said that, he's the next safety in terms of who you think is going to be the guy coming out of that safety room in the next couple of years. He pointed to Tillman as being that guy that can do it all. And I think Teo has taken him under his wing, kind of shown him the ropes. And, there's been a lot of positive buzz, even going back to spring ball, of what Tillman was doing on the defense side of the ball and how it complements everybody else. So I think Teo, Tillman, I think that's your 1-2 at free safety. At strong safety, a lot of expectations for Evans. And I think it's a nice luxury to have somebody like Nate Ritchie. He's not talked about like he was when he, returned from his mission and had sort of the expectations that he did returning home. But I still think he's a very valuable commodity for Utah in that safety room. To have somebody that's been with the program as long as as Utah has, for him to have the experience that he does, that is huge for Utah in this safety room. So don't take Nate Ritchie for granted. He's still a valuable piece to the secondary, even though we don't talk about him as much as some of the other safeties. He is still valuable to that room. So overall, that's how I see it. That's how I see the depth chart. That's what I predict anyways. Again, I would love to hear from everybody. Who do you think starts at certain open competition battles? Who do you think emerges as, a key backup? How do you see the second units shaking out? I want to hear from you guys, so please send me your suggestions, your thoughts, your questions on what we might see with the depth chart next week. With all of that said, let's get to my conversation with Andrew Crowley from last week about Utah's non-conference schedule and just some other thoughts on Utah basketball as well. All right, strap in, because returning to the Blockcast is the man, the myth, the legend, Andrew Crowley, a.k.a. Runnin Hoops Pod. Andrew, what's up, man?
New Heights gets Taylor Swift, you get me. I'm not sure, which podcast is going to get more views,
All I can say is who's got it better than us?
That's
nobody. Right, Andrew, man, it's good to have you back on the podcast. And, obviously we're inching closer and closer to the football season kicking off, but I thought this would be a good opportunity with Utah finally announcing their non-conference schedule in full, which has been interesting to follow because we've learned about certain games and certain matchups along the way, but Utah elected to hold off until they had the schedule complete. And so they announced it earlier this week. And I think I thought would be appropriate to get you on the podcast to pick your brains and get your thoughts. You've already published an episode on the Runnin Hoops Pod, which is great. Let the people know where they, if they don't already listen to you, but let them know where they can find you.
Yeah, it's over wherever you get a podcast. Just look up Runnin Hoops Podcast. I published an episode on Thursday. It's called Hold All Calls. The Runnin' Utes have released their schedule because, I'm a self-proclaimed scheduling nerd. I search high and low for games. I'm on like the directional Oregon, websites looking to see if maybe Utah's playing them in an exhibition or something. Now I don't know what I'm going to do with my free time.
I was just about to ask.
Out.
Yeah, there's probably so much free time now. Like, what are you going to do?
Yeah, I've got a comprehensive Big 12 preview that I'm working on, that I'm digging in on, and but I'm also looking forward to this football season. I tell you what, opening in the Rose Bowl, not much better than that. I can tell you that.
Oh yeah, that'll be a fun one, man. We are about 2 weeks out from that game kicking off. Just incredibly exciting. August hits and it's like, feels like it's going so fast. And then once we get to like the second, third week of fall camp, time just slows down and you're just like, oh, can we get there already?
Yeah.
And so the excitement builds. And obviously now, with basketball, it's only going to continue to grow. I think there's a lot of excitement for good reason for Utah basketball this season. And so let's dive into it. Let's dive into the schedule. Utah announced it, I believe, on Monday or Tuesday. They announced and released the full non-conference schedule, and I'm going to pull it up here in just a sec. But Andrew, I'll just ask you, when you saw the list, when you saw everything non-conference, exhibition games, first glance, first impression, what'd you think of the non-conference schedule?
Yeah, it was about what I expected for year one for Alex Jensen. They're going to play a couple of challenging games, against Power 5 teams in the non-con, couple of road games, an MTE. But, there's certainly no murderer's row here, right? Like they've got some really nice, games baked in. But I got to say, I love the two exhibition games against Nevada and at Oregon. You talk about like, us trying to uncover games. I mean, that was like tenfold when they had the secret scrimmages of years past, right? Where you're like, hey, Keanu Dawes had 10 points in the secret scrimmage. He's going to take off this year or whatever. We don't have to worry about that anymore. And so I love that they're getting two good tests that don't count at all. And then they jump right into their schedule. And I think it sets up really nice for them.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the exhibition games. To get that first one versus Nevada at home, I think is great. Then you go to Oregon for an exhibition game. And man, I hope they put in the fine print, like, we reserve the right to count this as our season opener if specific circumstances are met. Because, obviously Utah and Oregon have a long history, and what better time to take on a Dana Altman team than at the beginning of the year rather than the end of it. And so, frankly, I think that Oregon exhibition game is going to be a really good test for Utah, where they're going to learn a lot about themselves. Oregon isn't necessarily the biggest team, but they do have Nathan Biddle returning, and he's a big guy. And, obviously the biggest concern right now with Utah is their size. And so I think they're going to learn a lot about themselves in that exhibition game and how to handle, competing against the big. So that'll be interesting. First glance, that's what, stood out. Like, we had kind of a feel for what was coming with the schedule, with some of the the games that had not been officially announced, looking at Cal and Washington. But seeing Nevada, seeing Oregon, I thought those are two really good teams to schedule as exhibition games. And then, you get into the regular season, the season opener, you open up with 6 straight home games. And, this is really a tale of two schedules, essentially, the first half and the second half. And I think this is a great way to, for Alex to kind of figure some things out through the first 6 games, allow his team to gel and build that chemistry through, quality, air quotes, competition. We kind of understand what they're going to be competing against, looking at that list with Purdue, Fort Wayne, and Sam Houston State. But, Sam Houston State came to Utah a couple years ago and gave him a pretty tough test. So I think that'll be really good for Alex to kind of figure some things out through those first 6 games, because that second half of the non-conference schedule gets a lot tougher.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much buzz and excitement around the men's basketball program for the first time in years. And so I think it's a good, it's almost like a good reward for the fans that they're playing these 6 straight home games to start off. I mean, San Jose State is, coming out of the Mountain West, right? And so they're not your traditional, again, SWAC team or directional Montana that, a lot of teams open with on opening night. And so, and Tim Miles is a seasoned coach. He's been around, and he can coach him up. So I think it'll be some good tests, all winnable games, and really will give them a lot of excitement, momentum, and really a chance for Alex and his staff to tinker with the lineup as well. In those first 6 games, right? Like we're going to spend a lot of time in the lead up to the season talking about, well, who's the starting 5? Who are the first couple of guys off the bench? Everybody should play in those first 6 games, and everybody should get experience, unless, they're planning on redshirting somebody. But,
Right.
Absent that, like, I think it sets up for them really nicely and gives them, enough of a runway to this MTE that I'm sure we'll talk about here, and getting Grand Canyon. And then, to your point, that back half of the schedule where, they've played together for a few games and they're not just going in, kind of cold like the team did last year when they played Mississippi State early and they had all those injuries.
Right. Yeah, I think that's pretty significant to, get those 6 home games, and not just for what it means on the floor with the team, with the players. Obviously that's most important, is how those guys gel and come together, because, playing in the Big 12, they're going to need to play some good basketball. And so getting together on the same page early in the season, potentially getting to that second half and maybe still in a game or two that come as a surprise, I think would be great. But too, kind of to your point that you hit on is, the fans and the fan base, to get 6 home games to welcome in the Alex Jensen era, I think is such a fantastic thing for Utah to really kind of build momentum going into that second half of the non-conference schedule and getting into Big 12 play. I think, it's going to be really important for Alex and for, this Runnin Utes squad to obviously come together. I think it's going to be really important to provide, at least excitement and things that are clearly pieces that Alex will be able to build with. So I think, with the way that things have gone the last couple of years for Utah fans, and even just beyond the last few years, over the last decade, really, with the way that things have gone for Utah fans, I think this is a great opportunity, like I said, with those 6 games to usher in the new era under Alex Jensen, and then, get after it in the second half.
Yeah, for sure. And barring a real, step on a rake type situation, I mean, they should be 6-0 in these games. And that's just going to continue to build momentum for them. get the players some confidence, and hopefully allow them to against those live bullets, right? The live action, really play together and kind of figure out who works well together and who those optimal lineups are.
Yeah. Yeah, and so to your point that you were getting to is that gets us to the Acusera series. I think I said that right. Maybe I butchered that. But they're essentially they're MTE where
Yeah.
they'll open up with Grand Canyon and then they'll play either Iowa or Ole Miss. I think that's, two really solid opponents to have in an MTE like this, and potentially for Utah like we're talking about here is it's very possible that you go into that at 6-0, feeling good about yourself, playing good basketball. It's going to be your first tough test, but against Grand Canyon, I think, there should be enough there where you feel like you can get a win against a quality opponent and on a neutral site, add a nice little win to the resume, and then you're going to face, a tough test in that next game. And I think that's kind of a sweet spot for Utah to build that momentum, to build and work through some things, and then getting into that MTE, which is something that you also alluded to allow them to work through those things and build momentum properly. The timing of it, the sequencing of the schedule, I think is really good to hit the road and be on a neutral site, get away from home, and test yourself. I think that's going to be a really fun series to see how Utah, given the talent that they've brought in, how that checks out against these talented teams. Grand Canyon has been a surprise program over the last couple of years, but they've recruited good players. They've recruited a lot of talent into that program now, and so that'll be a good first test.
Yeah, that's a really interesting game for a number of reasons, right? Like Grand Canyon lost quite a bit of their talent from last year's team that won the WAC and went to the NCAA tournament, but that was a deep team. And so they do have a couple of pieces back. And then to your, like you said, they brought in some transfers. Bryce Drew can coach, and they're also stepping up in weight class by joining the Mountain West this year. And so I just think that's a really good test for Utah on a neutral floor. The best team they will have played to that point, not in the exhibition. And then you sort of are a winner either way, if with Ole Miss or Iowa from a net ranking standpoint, right? Like those two teams will probably be in the top 50, top 75 of the net all year long. If you get Ole Miss, I mean that's going to be a huge test for them. Iowa is sort of in the same position that Utah is in, breaking in a new coach. But they've recruited the portal incredibly well. And so, it's just a really interesting, 2-game series here. And it's because you get Grand Canyon first, and this is no disrespect to the Lopes.
Yeah.
There's no losers bracket in this tournament, right? Where if you lose that opening game, whereas in the past in like the Diamond Head or the Myrtle Beach or whatever, if you lost your first game, you got slotted with a bunch of, mid-majors essentially. Right. And then you were sort of having to, if you lost to them, it was super embarrassing, right? You don't have that in this, right? You're getting Iowa or Ole Miss no matter what happens in that first game. And so I think that's going to be a really good test for them.
Yeah. And then, you're after those two games, you're going to be on the road at Cal. And I think, I love the old Pac-12 flavor in this non-conference schedule. Obviously with Oregon as the exhibition, you've got Cal on the road with what Mark Madsen has done there with California. And then you've got Washington to finish it up. But even, Steve Alford at Nevada, like just, there's a lot of ties to the old Pac-12, and I thought that was really cool. But going on the road to Cal, that's going to be a fascinating matchup with what Madsen has done there, building that program. Them competing in the ACC and making some noise in that league last year. Really fascinated to see how Utah stacks up in a true road test. Right, I think that's going to be really, really interesting. And then you come home, Cal Baptist. another neutral site game against Mississippi State. That's going to be a fun, an interesting one. I don't know if it'll be fun yet. We'll learn if it'll be fun as we get to closer to it and see these guys in action. But what do you make of the rest of the schedule after we get through that MTE?
Yeah, I think the Cal game is really interesting. I don't think folks thought that Mark Madsen would struggle as much as he has so far at Cal. And like recruiting's not the issue because Mark Madsen is a heck of a recruiter.
Yeah,
it's just the pieces haven't quite fit. File this under, stats only I know. But I think Utah has won the last 3 times they've played at Haas Pavilion. And so, hey, wait, what's for? Right. So that's a real good chance, to go on the road, get a win, get some confidence. Mississippi State, I think they're going to be in the mix for the NCAA tournament, no question.
Yeah.
And, guys like Rothstein and some of the other experts have them in the upper tier, upper half of the SEC. And so, that's really going to be an opportunity for Salt Lake and Utah fans to show out the way that Mississippi State fans did last year in Biloxi or Tupelo or wherever they played last year in that 2,000 seat arena.
Right.
And so I love that game. They should play a game at the Delta Center every year, if not 2 or 3, and then the roadie at Washington, again, a familiar foe, an arena that we're all used to seeing on TV, a coaching staff that's very familiar to Utah fans as well. But that's a big spending program, right? Washington's got some high expectations. And so I think that's a game that really, really gets you set for Big 12 play, which will be, coming up on, New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, something like that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you finish with Washington. And, Washington is going to be really fascinating this year. They've got a lot of size. That's going to present some interesting matchups and how Utah, handles that. That's going to be, I was looking through rosters earlier today and they've got, 4 or 5, 6 guys that are at least 6'11". So they have a lot of size. That's going to be, not just a great test in the sense that you're going to Washington and you're facing a program that invests in a lot, schematically and personnel wise, that's going to be a tough matchup as well. So I'm with you there. I think that'll have them prepped and ready to go for Big 12 conference play and we'll hit the ground running. So, now that we've kind of ran through the schedule, let me ask you now, just what are you looking forward to with this Runnin' Utes team with the non-conference schedule? Just what do you think the storylines are going to be as we get closer to the season and as we get into the first couple weeks, couple months of action for Alex Jensen and the Runnin' Utes?
Yeah, I think we're going to find out pretty quickly, whether, how bought in this team is, because you're playing 6 games right off the bat that you're supposed to win. And, a lot of teams and Utah teams in the last, as we've talked about, decade or so have sort of done this. They kind of coast in some of those games, and you can harken back to, Sam Houston walking in, punching him in the mouth and beating him. Southern Utah pushing them to a near buzzer beater.
Right.
I think that Alex and his staff establishing their culture, their expectations, what he's talked about as his non-negotiables. I think we're going to see that on full display in these first couple of games where they're really going to go out and look to lock these teams down. Doesn't matter, that, Holy Cross is, 300 plus in Torvik or Ken Palm or whatever. I don't think that stuff is going to matter to this team and this staff. So I think one of the storylines heading into the year is just going to be, okay, we've talked about roster building. We've talked about assembling talent. We've talked about guys who do things the right way. Are we going to see that on the court? Right. And so I think that's going to be, a big storyline. And then as the schedule goes on, It's, can they hang?
Yeah.
Can they hang with teams that are in their peer group in the Power Five, whether that's Ole Miss, Iowa, Mississippi State, Cal, or Washington? And so I think, those things are going to be the big time storylines, because we're going to find out, I think, fairly quickly what this team's going to look like in Big 12 play based on their performance in some of these other games.
Yeah, I had a very similar thought. I wrote down the first thing is exactly that, first impression, right? Like getting a look at this team, seeing what they're about, seeing the talent, seeing how well they work together, not just in the sense of first impression being an exciting type of thing, but I think it's going to be important for Alex to make a good first impression, because that'll do a lot for the fan base, right? Like I said earlier, the fan base, it's been a tough time for Utah fans, the last little while.
Yeah.
And I think that first impression will go a really long ways for Alex and this squad. And then to your point, right, seeing what the product actually looks like. I think there's a lot of intrigue around how this team is going to play, right? We know that they've brought in some talented players, some guys that certainly have to make leaps, some guys that have to make significant strides in their games, but undeniably, they've brought in a lot of talent, a lot of athleticism, and I think we all kind of have an idea of what sort of brand of basketball they want to play, but we don't know for sure. And I think that's going to be really exciting to learn, really intriguing to see what, Alex, how he sort of puts this offense together, and what sort of structure and emphasis he puts on the defensive end of the ball, or defensive end of the floor. And so that's going to be really, really interesting, is exactly that, just the first impression. And then, again, where can you find a signature win? I think that's going to be really important. And, he's going to have a few opportunities away from home to get a nice signature win. He'll have one, at the Delta Center as well, and a great opportunity for him against, Mississippi State, but he'll have, a handful of opportunities away from home to potentially win one. And as we've learned over the years, that road games are something to some programs. To others, they're nothing and meaningless, apparently. And so I think, Alex can get off to a good start getting a road win, which Utah it's just evaded Utah for whatever reason the last couple of years. So I think that'll be a big thing. And then too, just going through the ebbs and flows of this team, working through it, coming together. There are going to be bright moments. There are going to be some lows. And I think how this team responds to those highs and lows will be really interesting. So those are things that I'm going to be looking forward to with this team as we get into closer to the season and into non-conference play. And then, we'll go from there. But would be curious, Andrew, just your thoughts overall now that we're here in August, now that the team has been put together, now that they're kind of getting some traction on the recruiting trail with stuff. Just what are your thoughts on the program? And you can take it whichever direction you want.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think that, the vibes have kind of died down a little bit, because, they're just putting in the work, right? Like Alex has, he's done the car wash interview circuit, and, he's got his staff in town. Martin Schiller's now in town. I think the international players that were expected to join the program, later in the summer are here, or at least will be here this week, or, in the near future, because classes start soon.
I think right? Abby is here. I think I saw
Abby's here. I'm sure Joshua Hayes is floating around Salt Lake City somewhere, and all of that. And so, I think the program is in a good spot. They've got the support that they need. They, as you have pointed out, they've upgraded their talent. They've got some really solid coaching. And now it's just a matter of putting that all together and then convincing the next wave of recruits and other players. I think we've been hearing people point to the 2026 class, the 2027 class as kind of key classes for the state of Utah, but also for this program. And so, there's also this, kind of prove it sort of,
Yep.
sort of thing that Alex now has to do. He's got to go out and show that his, philosophy, his, path to win, as he said in many interviews, is the right one, right? And that he and Wes Wilcox, put together the right kind of roster to go out and compete. And so that's, I know I'm rambling here a little bit, but kind of jumping back to one of the things that you talked about with how do they respond, right? I used on the podcast that Brian Kelly clip over and over again, where he's talking about, we're here talking again about the same things. And that's how it's been for Utah basketball the last couple of years. And so even in a loss, if you've got a team that's not defending, not rebounding, right, not blocking out, all of those little things, that I think is where folks are going to start to be like, okay, well, wait a second.
Right.
That's where the vibes are going to change a little bit. But, I don't necessarily anticipate that happening. I'm just saying that, I think some of those things are going to be the telltale signs. It's super easy to win games at home. It's a whole different thing to go into a neutral environment, to go on the road, even in some of these venues that are not filled, right? Like some of the old Pac-12 venues like Cal's or Oregon State's, they're still tough places to play. And so, you've got to do those things and take those things on the road. So I'm interested to see how they do that. And I think back to your original question, that will give us a really good indicator of what the state of the program is.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And, with recruiting, I think it'll be really interesting to see what Utah pulls off in this 2026 class. I think it's important to keep in mind they're playing catch up with a lot of these prospects, right? Coming in together as a staff in April. A lot of these prospects have been recruited for a couple years now by certain college staffs. And so playing a lot of catch up, right? We've seen a couple guys eliminate them from their process. Junior County, who, when I was told when certain guys joined the program that junior was going to be a big priority, and unfortunately Utah wasn't able to make up the sort of ground that they needed to stay in that one. But you're seeing them linked to top 100, top 150 type of prospects, way more than we've seen in recent years. And I think that's really exciting. And I think it speaks to the point of emphasis that Alex and Wes Wilcox have with recruiting and bringing in, highly talented players. They're going to continue to push for Abdou Touré and try to pin down that official visit with him. He's a top 30 type of prospects, and he would be the type that, he would be the centerpiece of a class, of anybody's class really in the country. But they've got a couple other guys, Hurley Brutus, who just scheduled his official visit. Great name, by the way.
Yeah, all name
fantastic.
Team.
All name team. Just
offer him on the spot. I don't understand that. Let's get it done, guys.
Why wasn't he offered before? Hurley, come on. Yeah. Brutus, come on.
Yeah, you need
Jamin
that guy.
Sondrup out of Springville, another 4-star type of kid, local kid. And so, Utah's in the mix with a number of guys. And I think it's going to be important, to your point, for Alex and this program to deliver a quality product to sell to these prospects, because, while they're playing catch up with this 26 class, they're almost on equal footing with building these relationships with the 2027 class. And that's where you can start to see a lot of payoff with recruiting and with the point of emphasis that you have on recruiting high level talent. So, we'll see what they do. But again, I'm with you. I think the vibes, the excitement has sort of died down just a little bit, just because, it's out of sight, out of mind. Football's on the forefront of everybody's brain. And that's correct. That's the right mindset to have. Yeah, you're not wrong for that.
Yeah.
But I think as we get closer, I think the excitement will again ramp up, and I think this will be a pretty fun year. So, Andrew, man, it's always fun to have you on the podcast. I appreciate you. I'll be joining you soon. We'll have another one of our fun conversations, deep, long, hour-long conversations, however long we go.
Yeah.
But really appreciate you taking some time, man.
Our off-season grades, they might be a little bit different this year.
Might be. Just maybe.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
All right, man. Well, let the people know what you've got in the works. I know you just published an episode, but let them know anything else on the horizon.
Yeah, so I've got the episode that's out right now. My latest episode is just breaking down the schedule, going through all the numbers, the metrics, kind of doing a best case, worst case, that sort of thing. It's 36 minutes, so it's very, consumable for that drive home. I've also been going through the Rick Majerus biography over the summer, My Life on a Napkin, and so I've put that out. It's like a 6-part series. Yep. And so, there's a lot of really interesting insights there that you get about both Rick and Utah basketball and Alex Jensen. And going back and listening to the things that he has to say about Alex Jensen are really, number one, interesting, but also hilarious. Like he talks about how when he saw Alex come off the plane after his Mormon mission, that he cried because it looked like he put on 100 pounds, and just stuff like that. So I've got that, and of course, we'll be carrying on through all the way to basketball season, with various previews and other things like that. So check us out, Runnin Hoops Pod, over on X and wherever you get a podcast.
Andrew, man, you do a great job. Again, appreciate you taking some time to hop on with me on the Blockcast, and we'll keep in touch and get you back on the podcast much sooner than the last time.
Yes, sir. Can't wait.
Appreciate you, dude. All right, Andrew.